So this is how I build full stack SaaS applications using AI coding. This is the app that I'm currently working on. It is a TikTok post carousel generator. So very simply, the idea is it's going to create content for us to automate marketing on TikTok and Instagram. So you can see here we've generated some carousels to test this, and we're getting like 700 views per video. Each carousel is designed to teach something. We're in the e-commerce space, so we're teaching stuff to do with dropshipping. And this is what the product does, but I want to show you my workflow for how I actually use AI coding. You're probably wondering who I am. If you don't know who I am, my name's Sebastian. I run a software company called ChatIQ. I've been running it for about 2 years now. I started with no code, and now I'm using AI coding and exploring how to basically use AI coding to build full stack apps. And one of the things that I'm trying to focus on is not only build scalable, secure code, but also reduce hallucinations within AI coding. And this is the system that I use. I've got instructions and I've got a prompts folder. And these are basically a huge step to creating something that's going to be accurate, right? So when you're, for example, if I go onto the app here, right, let's say I wanted to add in a navigation panel on the left-hand side. If I were to go to the cursor, right, and I were to go to Composer, and I would say, you know, create me a nav panel, well, obviously you'd give it a bit more of a detailed prompt. The trouble with this sometimes is it can get a little bit confused about where to put it, what it does, what the navigation panel looks like, and how it interacts with the rest of the code. And obviously with this, we can very quickly break the app that we're building, and it can take us like 10 to 15 prompts before we actually get that thing working. So I create these instructions, and you can see, for example, using Supabase, this is a instruction that I've created to show the AI exactly how to code out the app for Supabase, but it uses default example code, right? So this is about 500, 600 lines of instructions on how to actually integrate the app with Supabase. The same thing goes for my database layout as well. So I've obviously got a tree of my entire database scheme. I've got how the whole thing works. So when I'm telling the Supabase, when I'm telling it to integrate with Supabase, it not only knows the exact steps that it needs to take, but it also understands how my database is laid out. So then it's going to avoid creating just random hallucinations. So let me just give you a demonstration of how I do this. So for example, if we come to the app, let's say we want to add in a navigation panel. First thing I would usually do is go to something like V0 and I would generate a navigation panel, right? So I want to have a generator section and a settings section. But if I were to just copy this code, right, and there are other ways of doing this, but this is the way that I do it. If I were to copy this code, I were to go to a composer and I were to say, generate me a navigation panel, and I were to say, here's my sample code. Right, and I gave it this, it's going to get a bit confused and it will probably break. So here's what I do instead. I take that idea of what I want to create, and I usually use GPT-01 Preview to create these product requirement documentation. Okay, so essentially what we're doing is we're saying act as a senior software engineer and create a product requirement document which is going to break down the exact steps that we need to take in order to include this code, or in order to add this new feature. This is a very simplistic example where we're just adding in UI elements, but this works incredibly well with more complicated things like the database. So for example, here I've just said create me a product requirement documentation for this. We're going to add a navigation panel to the dashboard page. Blah blah blah, separate sections. We've got one section called the generator. Don't add any functionality to it yet. I just want it to be placed in on the right hand side. So I made an error here with right, I meant left hand side. And then what I've done is I've given it the example code of what the navigation panel should look like. And then I've said break down how to integrate this into my current app, right? So I've not just given it the code, I've then said, look, here is access to the rest of my app, right? And I've given it the code for the rest of the app. Now, there are two ways of doing this. You could do it in Composer, right in Cursor itself, right? If you were to use the chat itself. So for example, right, we could actually just use O1 Preview in here. The trouble is I find that if I do that, it's quite difficult to, create it and then copy that prompt and then use that later on. We could send it to a file, but then we're just using up our usage credits and it's just a bit annoying. So I like to do it this way because then we're just not using up our O1 Preview usage credits in Cursor. But anyway, the point is we give it access to the rest of the code, okay? And I'm not going to go through all of this stuff, but you can see I'm not just giving it one file, I've given it multiple files. And now, right, rather than just saying to Cursor that I'm going to create a navigation panel, I'm saying create a detailed product requirement document on how to do this without breaking the app or any existing features. Also, I say include the sample code for the nav component, make it clear on how to integrate this without breaking anything, blah, 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 blah. Now, usually I add a little bit of extra information to this. And that would be something like, you are a senior software engineer, think through this step by step, think of all edge cases, work through this in every single step. And it's also incredibly useful to do this sort of thing with debugging as well. So one example is you could say, create me a detailed product requirement document on how to resolve these errors. Here's the example code. And then the trouble that I find is when we're coding with AI, right, over time, when we're using the chat or we're using Composer, what will happen is we become lazy as humans because we can see the AI is doing a lot of the work. We can then very quickly get frustrated with what's happening and saying, look, this isn't working, and then just be like, just fix this error. So instead, if you say these are the errors, this is all the code, and then you say to O1 Preview, think through all of the reasons that could be causing this error, think through all of the edge cases that I have not thought of, and come at this from a different perspective. Also, actually plan out, not telling it to actually do it, but plan out how to actually approach these fixes and these bug fixes, including information on how you would do this, and then also break down the exact steps to integrate and basically repair these errors through each one of these different options, right? So if it's come up with like 10 different ways of resolving these bugs, then we can take that product requirement document and give it to Cursor, and you'll see how quickly it manages to make this work. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a demonstration. I'm going to copy this product requirement document, right? And you can see how long it is. It's given us the example code, adjusting the layout. This is going to do it wrong because I told it to put it in the wrong part. We're going to copy this. We're going to come to Composer. And what we're going to do is we're just going to say do this, okay? And what we can do is we can just go ahead and select the files that we need, right? So we're just going to go to the dashboard. So we're going to get the page, we're going to get the layout. We'll add that in as well. And that should be fine for now. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to write at the bottom here, make sure to put the nav bar on the left. I said right, but I mean left. Okay, and actually what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy and paste that like 3 or 4 times, because the more I do that, the higher the chances of Composer actually understanding. So first thing we're going to do now is we're going to close this just quickly, and I'm going to just make sure the index is synced. Features, resync the index, cool, and then we're just going to run this, and you'll see what's going to happen, right, is it's now got a detailed instruction on how to do this. So we're taking the guesswork out of Cursor. So basically what I've noticed is a huge amount of the hallucinations that happen when we're coding using AI happen mostly because we are not explaining to the AI exactly what we want it to do, right? So we're going to go and install this. And while that's installing, I'm just going to break down why I think this works. So when we are talking to the AI and we are telling it to implement a change or implement a fix, typically we go directly to like maybe the 5th or the 10th step. Okay, I like to think of it essentially kind of like an algorithm, right? Or think of it like when you're making a pot of tea. Okay, you could tell the AI to make me a pot of tea, and it would go ahead and try. But you could make it easier for the AI by saying, first, get your kettle. Secondly, put water in it. Thirdly, get your tea leaves, put it in the teapot, then put the water in, let it brew for 2 minutes, then pour the tea out, right? So now it's got detailed steps, so it's less likely to go off in its own direction and do something random. So that's basically what we're doing here by covering all edge cases. So now, if we come to the app, you can see it's instantly added in that navigation panel. Nothing's broken, nothing's happened. Now obviously, because I told it not to add any functionality, it's not got any functionality here. But you can see just how quickly we can implement new features into the app without having any problems, without breaking anything. Now I've shown you a very simplistic example here, but if we take that same principle and we use it for more complex examples, you can rapidly develop these apps significantly quicker. And the same thing goes for, let's say we're checking security, for example, and vulnerabilities. What I would do is I would create a detailed instruction where I, for example, use various AI tools, like let's say we go to Perplexity, right? And I would do research through Perplexity, right? And it obviously depends on your experience level. Maybe you'll have an idea of what all of these things are, these vulnerabilities could be, or maybe sometimes just because we're human, we will forget different edge cases. So what I would do is I'd take this research, okay? I would then give this research to O1 Preview, break down exactly what I want it to do, and then I would say, right, we're going to create I'll tell you what, we'll do it right now, right? So we're going to create a mini pen test for our app, right? So we're going to take this, we're going to create a new product requirement document. We're just going to literally just give it all the information. I'm just going to paste it all in here. Then we're going to say, So, for example, right, I've said here, I have a Next.js 14 web app. Your job is to create a PRD for penetration testing and vulnerability checks, right? So we're going to list out the vulnerabilities, identify the chain of where else these vulnerabilities can leach into, e.g. other API routes. Think outside the box, come at this from a new angle, right? This line here works incredibly well because it almost basically tells the O1 preview to literally just think from perspectives that we wouldn't necessarily think of or wouldn't be immediately identifiable to us. And this is obviously incredibly useful if you're a less experienced developer and you've not necessarily, maybe been hacked before, you haven't seen different vulnerabilities that you may not know of. It comes at this from different angles and thinks about it from all different edge cases, right? Again, this works incredibly well. Telling it to think of a hacker's mindset, making sure to think only of top possible vulnerabilities, identify them, and then also, right, suggest fixes, break down these fixes into macro steps. That's the teapot example that I explained earlier, and then recommend these changes we need to make, include example fixes, blah, 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 right? This is obviously a very simplistic version. I would want to give it some sample code from my app and say, for example, we're going to be doing this for we're going to go into the create video endpoint, which obviously hasn't got any security on at the moment, and it's going to do the penetration testing on this, right? Maybe pen testing is the wrong phrase for this, but essentially it's going to go ahead and generate this document for us, and then we're going to use that and give it to Cursor and see what Cursor suggests. Now, it may be that Cursor will actually try and suggest fixes, or it may just say these are the fixes and these are the solutions. So we're going to give that a second. So you can see here, generating the testing document, mapping out the product requirements document, addressing vulnerabilities, security measures, enhancing security, and then it's given us this document, right? Now, I usually spend a lot more time on these documents, making sure that they are actually working. So typically, for example, with the Superbase instruction where I'm integrating with the database, this one here, this took me probably about 30 minutes to create, okay? Because I was thinking through all the edge cases, I was working out all the different edge cases and what could cause the AI to hallucinate and break, and then I was just improving this product requirement doc. Now, I have actually built a small system, basically a mini app, which will write these for me, which maybe I'll release at some point if people want, just let me know in the comments. But this just gives you an idea of how to approach this just really quickly while you're doing your AI coding, right? So we're going to do a demonstration, and I've got no idea what's going to happen here. We're just going to see, right? And you can see it's obviously given us a lot of stuff, right? Securing API routes, which is the biggest one. We haven't got any security on these API routes yet. So we're going to go in here. We are going to, first of all, I like to create a new instruction, and I will call this vulnerability check.md, right? Paste that in there, and obviously this isn't the perfect markdown file for now. I would usually convert it into markdown, but I don't think it really matters, to be honest. And we're going to do this vulnerability check on one of the API endpoints. So we'll do it on the create video, right? So run the at, what do I call it? Vulnerability, right? On the create video route, okay? For now, just suggest fixes. Actually, no, let's just see what it does from that, right? And we're going to, oh shit, we shouldn't be doing that. 1 second. It's going to try and use O1 preview. We don't want to use O1 preview. We want to use 3.5 Sonnet, and we'll use the latest one. I think that's the latest one. They've got weird naming systems. I don't really get it. So we're going to do that. We're going to send it. We're going to close this for now. It's going to analyze it. Key vulnerabilities found. Okay, it's going to go through, here are the recommended changes, and it's going through and it's actually suggesting these fixes, right? Obviously, you're going to want to go through and check this and make sure this is doing it correctly, and we could always take those fixes back, right? So, for example, what I would usually do is I would give this, let's say we're running this vulnerability check on this code here, I would copy this code, I would go to O1 preview, and I would say in the documentation earlier up here, right, I would give it the code of what I want it to do the check on. It would then write the instructions, and I would say don't write it for this specific code, but this is an example piece of code. The rest of our code looks very similar to this. This is how we've set it up security so far. What changes do we need to make, right? And then it would give us a much better result, okay? So obviously it's gone through. It's also created different things, and I did this in chat. I should have done this in Composer. And anyway, it basically does these different improvements, right? Input validation, resource protection, error handling, right? And that's a good one. I haven't got any error handling really at the moment. File system security, blah, 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 blah. It doesn't look like it's done. Has it not done the API security? 1 second. You know what? We're going to just do this in Composer. Okay. We'll create a new Composer, and then what we'll actually do. And then we would maybe say, make sure you secure the API, right? And again, you just run that. Composer would obviously go ahead and do this, right? And that's basically the way that I do this. That's basically the way that I make sure that my code is obviously secure, it's scalable, and also make sure that you are introducing new features and new elements into your app very, very easily without having the AI hallucinate by using these instructions. Now, I've given you a very simple explanation on how I do this. Like I say, usually I would probably spend half an hour on this before I actually go ahead and give the instructions to Cursor, because I would want to make sure, especially with things like this, right, I would want to make sure that the rate limiting instructions are set up correctly so my app is also still going to work. And I would also want to make sure whatever it's doing with all of these different things, right, that's not going to have a knock-on effect to the rest of my app. So, for example, right now, if I accept this, I'm pretty sure everything's going to break. Let's just go to here, right, and we'll refresh the page. Which one was it? It was a create video. Anyway, I don't think I'm going to have time to test it, but I'm pretty sure that break because we obviously need to set up other bits and pieces. But you get the idea, right? It's one of the best ways that I have found of making sure that your AI coding is not going to hallucinate. You're going to be able to create very, very powerful changes to your app significantly quicker. And obviously, the other thing that I have said recently in the past was once we've done that, okay, is you want to go through and do things like this, right? You want to say for this route, I would then say add comments, right? And then I would use my add comments prompt, okay? And then I would send that, and then what this is going to do is it's going to make sure that I comment that code. Now the reason I comment the code using this, okay, is because it allows me to understand the code that it's written much easier, okay, and as somebody who's learning as I'm going, that's obviously very useful for me, but also what it allows me to do is when I then use multiple files and I code across multiple files, the more commenting that's within the code, typically the less hallucinations there are from the AI and the better it implements new features because it has a much more detailed understanding on how the code goes together and what the code actually does. Just because it's line by line, right? Obviously go ahead, right, and you can see it's a bam, huge amount of comments added in, really, really cool, makes a huge difference, and again, we save that, right? So we've got a huge amount of comments. And I've got a whole load of different ones for these as well, for committing to GitHub and a whole load of different things, right? I've even got a prompt for how I actually create these product requirement documents. So yeah, let me know what you think. And obviously, if you guys are interested, I am running a free live class that will teach you how I go through my entire process of AI coding, going from, you know, a blank page to building your full stack web application. I am only letting 150 people register for that live training. It happens every week. At the moment, I think we've got about 50 to 100 spaces left on that live training. It's happening this week, so if you'd like to come along, I will leave the link somewhere around this video. But if you've got any questions for me, then of course, leave them in the comments.